Welcome to OpalesqueTV. Today I'm in New York, together with Jeremy Samide. He is the CEO of Stealthcare, which is the leading predictive cyber intelligence company in the world. Let's start with your background. How did you get started with cyber security, cyber intelligence?
So Matthias, my background is 18 years in cybersecurity. I spent 12 of those years supporting clandestine operations for the U.S. intelligence, Department of Defense, federal law enforcement, as well as some allied foreign governments, to include the private sector specializing in counterintelligence and cybersecurity. So I've dealt a lot with state-sponsored activities, what their capabilities are, what their capabilities are not, as well as dealing with a lot of incident response issues in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. So a lot of experience on both sides of the desk. So one of the reasons we started Stealthcare was based on our experience. We always thought that the hackers were 2 steps in front of the good guys, 10 steps in front. So what we decided to do was create a very proactive approach in radical thinking in how we approach the cybersecurity space. So we built Zero Day Live using cutting-edge machine learning technology in order to provide a more proactive, predictive approach to identifying threats before they actually happen. So also today, Matthias, I brought with me my colleague Keith Garner. He's our Vice President of our International Business Development. And he's going to talk a little bit more about the threat landscape, some of the trends that we're seeing in cybersecurity, what some of the threat actors are doing, and how you can protect yourself, and how we look at those threats and how we protect our clients.
Stealthcare is the leading cyber intelligence company that I have come across. And what we are going to talk about is very important for all corporations and individuals. Today, corporations spend each year millions for cyber warfare to protect themselves from intrusion. But still, bad actors come in and win over time and again and again. We will explore why this is the case and what can be done against that.
Yeah, it's true. Companies do spend millions each year on cybersecurity, and unfortunately, they're still getting breached. Why is that? The truth is that 90% of what we would call these branded security products, they're things that every company has to have. You have to have firewalls, you have to have email security, you have to have endpoint security. The challenge is that these technologies can only do so much. They only know about known threats. So once it's a known bad, then they can say, stop this from getting into my network. The challenge is that 42% of today's threat actors are using what is called non-signature based or zero-day or near zero-day threats. It's companies like ours and other threat intelligence firms that are able to layer our security into the existing security structure and prevent these types of attacks from happening, the unknowns. So an example that probably everyone knows is the WannaCry virus. It happened several years ago and basically worked its way through the entire world. Something like that was a zero-day or an unknown threat, meaning that it was something that these branded security products didn't know about and really couldn't protect their clients from. Stealthcare, via our Zero Day Live platform, we actually knew about that threat 15 days before it weaponized. So that's really the power of what threat intelligence can do. It predicts and acknowledges and knows how to prevent threats before they happen. So to give another example, one that's more recent, it might not be as well known to your audience, but company called Norsk Hydro. It's one of the largest aluminum manufacturers in the world today. Their operations were completely shut down by a ransomware attack that turned out to be what's called Locker Goja. This was an attack that Stealthcare and our zero-day life platform knew about 46 days in advance of that attack. So again, the idea is, how do we identify and prevent these from weaponizing and going through an organization? You do that with a layered security approach. So the tools that you have today are important. You have to have firewalls, you have to have endpoints. But if you don't take a layered security approach, if you don't provide true threat intelligence and have the ability to automatically push that into your existing infrastructure, you're going to be vulnerable. And the idea is, how do we reduce that attack surface? That's what cyber intelligence does, that's what threat intelligence does.
So Keith, what types of threat should be of most concern to corporations and individuals? And also, why are corporations actually your target?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Matthias. I think it's important that we don't think of just corporations, but it's small businesses. It's anyone who has data. And what you say is, why are they going after you? They're going after you for three main reasons. Again, whether you're a small business or a corporation, enterprise level, they want your money, they want your intellectual property, and they want your customer data. So those are all very important, and there's different types of threats that allows them to get at that. So I think what today a lot of executives truly should be concerned about is themselves. What we're seeing threat actors do is what is called business email compromise. What that in turns is, they take basically, if you've heard of phishing emails, they impersonate a senior executive at the company. So this executive could be away on business, and an email comes in to another employee at the company saying that this executive needs money right away. You would be amazed at how often those attacks work. And that's because when an executive gives an order and they say they want some money, a lower level employee who's the target is going to pay that. Well, once that money goes out the door, it's gone forever. So that's one example. When you're talking about your intellectual property, when we think of international threat actors, Russians, Iranians, Chinese, those that are trying to infiltrate and steal intellectual property from US corporations, they do that in a number of ways. With malware, that it actually allows them to pull data out of a company, see things like blueprints, plans, whatever it may be, and then use that technology for themselves, which puts a company at a great competitive disadvantage. And then I think finally, probably ransomware is one that every company, every small business is concerned about. Imagine not having the ability to do your business, to do your work. It's something that, when we talked about Norsk Hydro earlier, happened to them. They spent $40 million in the first week trying to deal with this challenge. And if you don't have the proper systems in place, if you don't have the proper upfront security, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable position to be a victim of these threat actors in those ways. So I think that, currently today, probably 85 to 90% of the market is focused on what we would consider the back end of the problem, or as you put it, reaction. That is the most expensive end of the problem. So let's think about this for a moment. You've had a breach at your organization. What happens? Do you have a roadmap to how to deal with it? Do you know who to call when something happens? Unfortunately, most organizations don't. So they're scrambling around to find the first person that picks up the phone, and now they're kind of at that person's mercy. If they're a big enough organization, they have to get a communications firm to come in and, how do we deal with our clients? How do we tell them about this information? What information has gone out of the door? It's time to lawyer up now, because what lawsuits are we going to get? So we're talking tens of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars that are being, in essence, what we believe, wasted on this back end of the problem. What we believe, and there's starting to be a slow but steady shift, is, what if we just prevented this before it happened? Now, it's only when it happens to you do you realize, oh, I wish I would have had some threat intelligence, or I wish I would have known about this threat before it hit me. Well, that's a much cheaper end of the problem to focus on. There's platforms, there's intelligence, there's things that you can put into place, going back to that layered security approach, that will drastically reduce the chances of something bad happening to you. Could it still happen? Absolutely. But based on our research and what we've seen in working with our clients, we can reduce your overall attack surface by more than 50%. So imagine if you're an insurance person and you're about to write a cyber security policy that you want to protect your client from risk of a cyber attack, but at the end of the day, the goal is that they never get attacked, so they pay the premium and you never have to pay out on their risk. Well, if their chance of getting hit was 50% less, let's say client A than client B, who do you feel better about putting in a policy in place? Well, you want client A because they're 50% less likely to be breached. So I think as CEOs become aware of the bottom line impact and the top line impact that new advances in cybersecurity like threat intelligence can do, you're going to see that shift more and more to the preventative, so that again, you never have to deal with this back end of the problem. Focus on the front end. It's a great question, and there's really four components of threat intelligence and the way threats are born and work their way through any environment, any network. So threats come from different sources. They come from social media. They come from sensor networks. They come from the surface web. But really where we see most threats that are the most dangerous to organizations come from the deep, dark web. So what threat intelligence does and why it's so important is if you're sourcing most of your intelligence from that deep, dark web, but also from the other sources, you can start to put context around a threat and what it means to an organization. So too often times today, organizations, when they hear threat intelligence, they think to themselves, oh, I have a threat feed that's coming in. That should be protecting me. Well, it's really not, because it could be coming from one source of information. It could just be something that's found on the surface web, for example. But when you put that into context with something that you see in social media, something that you see on the deep, dark web, you start to build true intelligence that is actionable and timely. And to be able to push that into an organization as a threat hits that organization, even if it's an unknown, because we knew about it first, you are protected without having to do anything. We have a unique tradecraft. The way I like to talk to people about it is, think of us as kind of the undercover cops of the deep, dark web. We source about 60 to 65% of our intelligence from those deep, dark sources, along with our sensor networks, social media, and the surface web, to really bring a complete picture of what a threat is all about. The attack vector, the context, the impact, and more importantly, what it means to your organization. Every organization is unique and different. So the threat that matters to your company might not matter to another firm. Why? Because they might have different hardware, they might have different technology, they might be in a different industry. So we put our threat intelligence in automatically. It goes right into your existing security stack without the need of human intervention, and it can orchestrate that intelligence throughout all those existing products that you have. And again, it's unique to you. So we're only going to bring the threats to you that can do damage and that matter, and we do that in real time. What we believe is that every organization has what we call its own cyber DNA. So you have different firewalls, you have different email security, you have different tools. Some large enterprises might have what's called a security operations center or SOC team of 20 people. Some might have one guy who's dedicated to security. So the types of solutions that you put in place have to be effective for that organization. everything we've talked about, I think up to this point, has been focused on what do you do about your own organization. And if that's not enough to think about, in this interconnected world that we all live in, you have to worry about the security of third parties that you're connected with. So one example that comes to mind, and then I'll expound on why this is so important to do your due diligence, or to at least be aware of what security measures they have in place, is if we think of Target and their data breach of a couple years ago. Well, the threat actor didn't come at Target. The threat actor found a third-party weak link to get into Target, and that was Target's HVAC company. They happened to just share certain billing information, which allowed this threat actor to get into the HVAC company that was less secure, didn't have the security measures in place that a Target did, and then kind of move laterally through until they got into Target's organization. So it's very important. And there are services out there that are called third-party risk assessments that can be done that allow you to basically do a quick assessment of what security measures those folks have in place. The basic things are, do they have firewalls? Where do they store their data? Where are their what we call crown jewels? The very important things like customer information, intellectual property, and how is that tied into your systems? So you just have to know where you're sharing data, and just know that a threat actor can get to you through one of your partners. So you want to make sure that they have their security up to snuff as much as you have your own in a lot of instances.
So Keith, let's talk about phishing and business email compromise. I mean, recently, even me personally, over the last couple of weeks, I got a number of emails that I could clearly tell that somebody has breached an organization and somebody's email that I knew. So I can recall there was one incident where I thought, oops, I've never received an email like that, where somebody had suggested to download a specific hedge fund research report. And I thought, I never got something for free from these guys. So let me try to check on LinkedIn with that guy, and we were connected. What has happened? And I contacted the person through LinkedIn. I said, look, this really looks suspicious, right? Are you sure everything is right with your email? And then I got the comment back, oh, I'm so sorry, we got breached. Somebody took over our whole email system. But what was even equally worrying, that I've never got a public statement that this actually happened to this organization. So what I'm saying here is, tell me, what's going on in phishing and business email compromise, and can you do anything about that?
So Matthias, you hit on two great points. So first, you've probably been hanging around with us for too long. Kudos to you, though, for being aware that something was amiss. So I think the first thing that touches on is education. You have to talk to your employees. There's so many different firms out there that do security awareness training. That's a minimum thing that you can invest in. It's very cost effective, but it makes that employee think twice. In this day and age, banking information, click on this link, personal information, you have to be very wary of any of that coming through your email. And I think what happens today, and we're in such a fast-paced world, that, I know that firm, that seems legit, and you click on it, wanting to learn more, and you realize too late that you've been a victim of a phishing attack. And that's how these firms do it, because they do their research, they know what the email address should look like, they know the name of the executive or whomever they're phishing for, and they make a request for you that seems maybe not something you get every day, but at least seems realistic. So again, education, very important as a frontline defense. But you also mentioned, how come I never heard about this? Why wasn't this disclosed? Well, I think today, if we pay attention, there is literally in the news every day a new breach, a new company going down, someone talking about it. For every one company that talks about it, there are probably 100 that don't. And the reason is they either don't think they're big enough, they don't think it's a bad enough breach, but the truth is they really don't know. That threat actor could still be inside their organization. So that kind of, again, comes back to how we protect any of that from ever happening. If you are aware of what the threat is, if you understand that, what we call that code or those indicators of compromise, the things that are allowing that malware to get into your environment, the education is important, but if you click on it, you want to click on it and you want it to be what we would consider a misfire. So that's what would happen to our clients. As we talked earlier, when we talked about Norsk Hydro, we knew about that threat 46 days before it happened. Had Norsk Hydro been our client, when they clicked on that download that was the ransomware, it would have been a non-event for them. Because the way the intelligence works is, yes, they might have clicked on it, but no information could go out. Because we've pushed that intelligence into your firewall to say, stop this. Don't let this happen. So that's really why a layered security approach is so important. Education is huge. You want to teach your folks not to click on things, but guess what? We're all human beings. We're failable by nature.
What do you see on the horizon from a threat perspective? How are these things developing? Where is it going?
So we've seen an uptick and have been monitoring really 3 different types of threats that are, we believe, going to be growing into the future. So one is when you look at our current geopolitical situation, the state-sponsored threats are still very impactful. I think as we see things that are happening in Iran right now, in China with the trade war, you're going to see more and more of a ramp up of state-sponsored threats trying to harm European Union, America, other countries that they might have political or philosophical differences with. We see these threat actors using very advanced malware, ransomware, a lot of tools for espionage so that they can really understand that what we're doing, and really focused, unfortunately, on our critical infrastructure. So as a government, as a public utility, these state actors are something that we should be very concerned about, because we have seen it time and time again to where they're trying to shut down a power grid. They're trying to do something to impact our day-to-day lives, and those should be very concerning for our governments and for all of us in the spaces like public utilities. I think there's also certain criminal syndicates that work together to basically try to blur and make it look like, for example, it could be a Chinese or a Russian threat actor when it's in fact a criminal syndicate. So you could almost think of it as a cyber mob. So they're able to have, when we talked earlier about command and control servers and the ability to pull out information, or the ability to basically share and malform different pieces of malware that maybe were stopped, but if you make a little bit of a change to it, it can now get into an organization. Those syndicates are something that we're tracking. And then I think, very simply, botnets or ransomware, malware as a service. It's very surprising, probably any of you that have teenagers, they might be able, just because of the computer classes they've taken, they might know how to break into a network or into a security camera or get past a Wi-Fi because it has a very basic password. Well, that's a very basic skill that a lot of people have, but you can go to places and you can buy a commercial piece of malware or ransomware. If you know how to get in, you throw the ransomware out there, and it's a revenue sharing arrangement with the actual threat actor who created the ransomware. So if you get it on a network, you get 70% of whatever they pay you in Bitcoin to get their network back up, and the malware as a service commercial guy gets 30%. So imagine how much money he's making when he builds something that someone who really doesn't have to be that technically sophisticated, just maybe not morally where they should be, takes something like that and uses it as a revenue stream. We see it all the time. So I'd say those 3 areas are very concerning right now. it's very important to focus on your people, to make sure that they have security awareness training, that they know what to look for, but that will fall apart if you don't really have solid policies in place. So what I mean by that, when we talked about business email compromise earlier, imagine that the CEO sends a note, comes into the admin, wire this money here, it's very important, it seems legitimate to her. If she takes that action and you don't have a policy in place that says, should that ever happen, step 2 is to get a signature from the VP. Step 3 is to, make a call to the CEO's cell phone to make sure that it's a legit process. Then however much you train the people, you're going to fail because the policy's not there. So typically what we advise every firm to do is start with your policies and procedures. Have a roadmap laid out for what happens. Because let's keep this in mind. If you have a breach, if something like this happens to you, it is a very stressful time. Your head is spinning, your stomach could be in knots. If you don't have a book to go to open up to say, if this happens, we do this, you've already put yourself at a great disadvantage. So make sure you invest in policies and procedures so that you know if A happens, this is the person we call. If it escalates to this, we do this. There are firms like ours that can help you build those policies and procedures. Once those are built, you typically move into the security and awareness training. But once that happens, then what does your network look like? Where are you vulnerable? So things like doing a vulnerability a vulnerability assessment, or what we would call pen testing, penetration testing, is very important. Many cybersecurity firms can basically tell you, here are where your weaknesses are, and here are the recommended actions that we would take to improve and enhance your security posture. Once those things are in place, you've already probably reduced your attack surface a great deal, so that's where things like the layered security approach really becomes important. So we've really narrowed the ability for that threat actor to get into your organization and cause damage.
So Keith, you're a cybersecurity and a cyber intelligence specialist. When it comes to hiring people for internal cybersecurity, what advice can you actually give? What is important here?
I think as a senior executive, sometimes it's hard. Do I have the person across the table from me that's going to do the best job? And a lot of times we'll get caught up in their credentials or the acronym that comes after their name based on what they've studied or what certifications that they've gotten. So I think just like in your own culture, you want someone that fits your culture. But I think most importantly, it's someone that's had true experience in cybersecurity. Do they have disaster recovery experience? Do they know and have they responded to incidents in the past? What kind of security background do they have, and how much experience do they have? One of the great challenges in this industry is, on average, when you hire someone, it takes an organization about 18 months to train them the way that they need to be trained to really understand the security and work within that enterprise's environment. Well, the average security professional stays with the same firm for 24 months. So let's do the math. It takes you 18 months to train them. They stay 24. So you basically get 6 good months of work out from them, and then they go someplace else. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of loyalty. So again, what's very important is that not only do you get good people, but you have to give them the proper tools. So you have to give them tools that are what we call force multipliers, like 0 Day Live. It's a tool that allows someone who has that security experience to have all of this great intelligence in one place, dig into it, understand it, see the context, apply it to your environment. So if you have the right balance, instead of investing in 6 to 10 people because you feel like you need all those people to handle all of the security incidents and things that are happening at your organization, maybe you hire 2 or 3 people and you give them force multiplying tools like ZDL that does the job. It saves you money. It prevents you from having to invest in more people that unfortunately you're probably going to train and they're going to go someplace else to the highest bidder. So you have to have the balance of both.
So Keith, you mentioned words like zero-day life, ZDL, and let me out myself here that I'm actually one of your users, right? So I have also your mobile app, which I think is absolutely impressive. So let's talk a bit your mobile app and the benefits it offers to your clients.
So it's a mobile world, and we wanted to create an app that had the same functionality of our tool, the same informative capabilities that it has, so that if your security staff is maybe off-site, perhaps they're in transit, and something comes up that they need to be aware of, say it's a new zero-day threat that we have identified, they can see that within the mobile app. And then we have the steps for remediation, just like we do in the platform, that they can look at to make sure, hey, is my environment covered? And then they can really share that with anyone in the organization that has access to the app. So what we find a lot of times is a CIO or a senior level executive might not be in the nuts and bolts and in the day-to-day of the actual tool itself, but they like having app access. So if something of import comes up that they want to be aware of, all that information is shared in real time and they can access it mobilely. Also, a lot of organizations have CIOs or CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, for hire, meaning that you might outsource some of your security work to someone who's also doing security for other companies. If you potentially have an incident or there's a notification to when they're not on premise with you, they can start to deal with it because they've gotten a notification on the app. So Matthias, we appreciate the opportunity to sit down in front of you and be exposed to your audience. So to show our thanks, what we'd like to do is offer a free consultation for those who I guess are interested, have heard what I've had to say today, and are kind of recognizing that maybe in your organization you have some of these same challenges. So we want to give you the advantage of our expertise, the advantage of our intelligence, and you'll see the link that we'll put down here. It's a secure link, so please feel free to click on it, and hopefully we can help you with some of your cybersecurity talent challenges, taking advantage of our expertise and the intelligence that we have to help you prevent these threats before they cause problems for your organization.